welcome to the first episode of PTR Perspective. My name is Zainab Imran and I will be your host. Today's episode delves into climate action deals and their impact on the power grid. Climate change and environmental degradation are existential threats to the world, and repeatedly we see acknowledgements of this increasingly worrisome fact, as well as fine-tuning of efforts geared at targeting these issues head-on. Prominent examples of this include the US President Joe Biden's climate action plan under his jobs and infrastructure bill, and the European Union's Green Deal, both of which aim to ultimately achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So on the panel today, I have PTR's Executive Director of Research and Consulting, Saqib Saeed. I've also got PTR's Senior Analyst leading the Transmission and Distribution segment, Alize Shahid, and PTR's Senior Analyst leading the Power Electronics segment, Mirza Kutub Beg. Saqib, Alize, Kutub, it's great having you. How are you all doing today?
Doing great.
Thank you
For having us.
Well, thank
How
you.
about yourself?
Fantastic. I'm great as well. Ready to get going. Now, coming back to the theme of today's episode, which is climate action deals and their impact on the power grid. Let's first take a look at Biden's climate action plan. So this plan focuses on targeting climate change across the board while also boosting the economy. And briefly, 4 of the many key takeaways from this that focus on climate action are the provision of 174 billion US dollars to incorporate EVs into federal and public vehicles, incentivize their adoption among private consumers, and create an infrastructure of 500,000 EV charging stations across the country. Point number 2 would be the provision of 100 billion US dollars to modernize the power grid in order to mitigate failures, increase resilience, and increase support for wind and solar energy. Number 3, a 35 billion US dollar investment into clean energy technology. This includes carbon capture, utility scale storage, and hydrogen. And number 4, requiring that utilities nationwide deliver a certain percentage of their energy from clean renewable sources. So this is a very high-level overview of features of Biden's plan, which by 2030 aims to achieve a 50 to 52% reduction in net greenhouse gas pollution economy-wide as compared to its 2005 levels. And along the way, we've got Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which outlines more specific actions and targets across sectors that overall aim to invest in public transport, including rail, provide high-speed internet access, improve roads and bridges, improve airport and maritime ports, create a network of EVs, improve the power infrastructure on the whole with a focus on resiliency, and invest in environmental remediation. So through this infrastructure bill, we see Biden's vision for what needs to be done to not only meet the climate goals, but also improve the American economy and infrastructure alongside. Now, I'd like to turn to Saqib to know more about this infrastructure bill and the intertwined climate plan in terms of what impact it's going to have on the American power grid. Saqib, the
Thank
floor
you,
is yours.
Zainab. Really nice introduction about the overall plan, the target set by the administration. I think it's really important to first take a look at the segments within the infrastructure bill, that how it is going to impact different industries across the board. And then we can go into the discussion of how it's directly going to impact the power grid, and then how does it connect with the overall climate related topic within the US. Let's say plans moving forward, having carbon neutrality by 2030, 80% is the plan, and then carbon free power generation by 2035. That's the plan, right? So as we discussed already, that a certain portion has been allocated for power grid area, and the way we see this is it's basically US's plan is to sort of address some of the issues that we've already heard about the power grid of the US in the past, and a couple of them. One of them you already talked about is the resilience of the power grid. We've seen time and again that how the grid has proved to be weak when it comes to certain extreme weather events, and how it has impacted a grid in different states across the country. So that's one. And then secondly, we've heard this again from many entities in the past. In the past decade, we saw many studies around how big portion of the grid is operating near or even beyond the end of life. So we look at the power transmission lines or power transformers, which act as the backbone of any power grid. And to have something which is the backbone of the network operating beyond end of life, definitely has its own impacts. So the way I see this is that it is supposed to, let's say, mitigate those problems which the grid has faced in the past, and then on top of that, prepare the grid for the upcoming renewable. Now, having a carbon-free power generation by 2035, so a certain percentage of renewable is going to be gradually increased in the energy mix of the country, right? So your grid needs to be prepared for that. So that's how I see this. So mitigating issues with the grid has faced so far, and then also preparing the network for the upcoming renewables, boom of renewables, which we can already see that the focus is now on the offshore wind in the US as well, which was always neglected in the past, and then also preparing the network for the interconnection of renewable energy moving forward. So this can be, let's say, summarized in a way that you solve the problems which the grid is facing right now, and then also prepare the grid for the next 15, 20 years, especially from the renewables point of view.
How exactly does this plan improve the grid's transmission network?
Right. So, as I said earlier, that one of the biggest challenges moving forward for the transmission utilities in the US is to add more capacity in the network, because you're going to have more renewables connected with the grid. Some of the studies that I've seen in the past predict that the grid capacity needs to triple by 2050 if the country is to achieve the targets that it has set for itself. And then on top of it, the old equipment that I already talked about needs to be replaced in order to facilitate the interconnection of renewable energy, right? So first thing that I can see this directly impacting is the large transmission projects, which are supposed to sort of connect the generation sources with the demand centers in the country, interconnection between different states of the country as well. So large transmission projects, and that too on gigawatt scale. We already saw that how HVDC was one of the areas which was neglected in the US in the past. This is something which we saw across European region, that how high voltage DC connections have really become an extremely important tool to connect different nodes of the grid. It increases the resilience, it increases the stability of the grid. This is something we saw that how it was sort of neglected in the US in the past. And then connection of offshore and onshore wind power generation. This is something which I think has been also neglected. There has been a lot of delays in terms of the interconnection of renewable projects with the grid. So with this certain portion of this 65 billion US dollars which has been allocated for the power grid is going to go towards the transmission facilitation program, which basically means that there is going to be loans available through Department of Energy to the developers of transmission projects, where they'll be able to receive this money, and then this will basically increase the process overall. We all know that how transmission projects really take a lot of time. uh, there were some examples in from Europe as well. Germany also faced a lot of delays in its transmission planning. And actually, back in 2019, before COVID, Germany introduced a law to sort of accelerate the whole process of adding more transmission capacity, speed up the process of installing transmission lines, right? And that was actually impacting Germany's renewable plans as well. So anticipating that in the US as well, I think this certain portion, which is around 2.5 billion US dollars, is going to be allocated for the transmission facilitation program. That means that all the project developers will be able to get this money and then sort of speed up the process of installing transmission capacity moving forward, which again is going to be really helpful to interconnect renewable energy with the grid overall.
So, as part of this transmission facilitation program, can you briefly outline what types of projects roughly are going to be covered in this?
Yeah, as I said, the focus is going to be on large scale projects. So the way this has been outlined so far is that it's on the gigawatt scale. So any project which is beyond 1 gigawatt is going to be eligible. Any new upcoming project, transmission project. And then for the existing projects, it's going to be 500 megawatts. Any project which is beyond 500 megawatt will be eligible for that. And again, this is going to include all the large capacity interconnections really going to be designed for the renewable energy, and then also interconnection across states as well. So these are the type of projects which are directly under this transmission facilitation program.
And what kind of investments do we expect in the smart grids area within the infrastructure plan?
Great question. So if we further slice this $65 billion investment that's going through DOE to the power grid of the US. One portion, which is around $3 billion, has been allocated for the expansion of the smart grid plan, which was basically introduced back in 2009. And the idea was to facilitate and then fund all the projects which fall under the category of smart grid. It's it's a broad term. Smart grid is a broad term, but what we saw, around 100 projects were funded already when this program was initiated back in 2009. And around 200 utilities, big utilities in the US, were able to get funding through this program. And primarily, the focus was on smart meters, data management systems, wireless communication systems within the utilities. So everything falls into the category of smart grids, right? So this $3 billion has been allocated for the expansion of that plan. Means that moving forward, there is going to be a lot of opportunities for utilities which were already thinking about adding smart metering infrastructure into the network, adding wireless communication to overall increase the resilience of the grid. So this $3 billion is going to be allocated for that. So we can expect again a lot of projects being planned by utilities, and uh, uh, again half of it is going to be funded by this federal investment coming through DOE again. And one thing I'd like to also add is that we already see that DOE is Department of Energy US is already moving forward very quickly, as all of the $62 billion investment is going to channel through DOE to different stakeholders in the ecosystem of power grid area, right? And we already see a lot of movement. DOE is already hiring, I think, around 1,000 new employees to make sure this investment is channeled to the stakeholders very quickly. And then there are new initiatives being taken by Department of Energy as well. One of them is called Building a Better Grid, which is basically kind of an attempt to connect with every stakeholder which might be involved in the expansion of the grid, in all the transmission facilitation program as well, and making sure that if there's a need of any studies that need to be conducted before this investment gets channeled through, those are conducted beforehand. So this Building the Better Grid program is really going to accelerate this investment that is expected to go into the power grid area.
Interesting. Thank you for the insight, Sakib. I'd like to switch gears and discuss the EU Green Deal now. So a little bit background on this. The European Green Deal commenced in the December of 2019 and aims to make Europe a climate neutral continent by 2050, much like US, the Climate Action Plan by Biden. So the most notable thing to come forward surrounding the EU Green Deal in 2021 was a series of proposals under the umbrella of delivering the European Green Deal that outlined paths across all sectors of the EU economy to collectively enable achieving the 2050 neutrality goal. And on the way to the 2050 goal, the European Green Deal has established an interim target of 55% emission reduction by 2030, again, much like the US Climate Action Plan. And this is compared to the region's 1990 levels, though. This is called a Fit for 55 package, which revised 8 existing laws and announced 5 new proposals. Of these 13 combined amendments and proposals, 4 directly impact the power grid, and they are the amendment of the Renewable Energy Directive, the amendment of the Energy Efficiency Directive, the revision to the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, and the Fuel EU Maritime Initiative. So let's discuss the amendment of the Renewable Energy Directive first. Kutab, with respect to flexible AC transmission systems and energy storage systems, can you tell me more about what this directive means and what impact it's bound to have?
Mm. So thank you for explaining it in a very nice manner, Zainab. So first thing is that technically speaking, when we know that when we talk about renewable energy generation, these kind of generation centers are typically located miles apart from the consumer loads or what we call demand centers. So the first thing which I believe is going to be added into this power grid is the new transmission infrastructure, which means that there are going to be lengthy transmission lines which are going to be added and which are going to enable this import of electricity or energy from these generation centers to the demand centers. That's the first impact which is going to be on the power grid. Secondly, when we talk about these conventional non-renewable power plants, which are mostly rotating ones, we know that they are being shut down because of carbon neutrality goals, as you discussed and mentioned, and because of these new more and more the renewable energy sources like solar energy, wind energy are added into the generation mix. Now the nature of these renewable energy sources is intermittent, and because of that, we have to face two kinds of problems. One is related to the voltage stability, and the other one is the loss of inertia, which was not the case earlier because we had moving turbines. Now, how this is going to affect the fax market is that the fact that the fax market, or what we call flexible AC transmission systems devices, these are there to address these two issues: the voltage stability and the loss of system strength. When we talk about two primary key fax devices, one is the statcom, which can be deployed to ensure the voltage stability. And then we talk about another technology which is relatively very old. We didn't see a lot of their deployments, this technology deployment in the past 2 decades, but recently we have seen a rollout of these technologies back into the grid, which is synchronous condensers. Now these are the rotating machines which are there, which are deployed to provide system inertia and the short circuit strength to the grid when the system becomes unstable due to any disturbance. So, and this is not just limited to the planning part. We have seen in the past that these systems have been deployed recently in Australia. And now US is also thinking about it. We have seen a very massive plan introduced by Germany to actually to install these statcoms by almost all the TSOs in Germany. So we are going to see that these are the kind of things which are going to be driving fax market because of these amendments in the Renewable Energy Directive. Third thing is the issues which were faced by US a lot in the past were related to the Ducker problem. Now we know that there's a massive rollout of solars as well, not just wind, from different players. And because of that, to actually deal with these duck curve problems, we need to have storage devices in place. Now, to have these storage devices in place, what we can do is the first thing we want to understand is if the batteries are economically, or solutions which comes with the batteries are economically viable or not. Yes, over time they are becoming more and more viable. The production cost of batteries is decreasing. The supply chain is getting more and more stronger. So yes, that is one energy storage is one stream which is also going to be impacted because of these renewable energy goals in Europe. Fourth thing, which I believe is one of the most important ones, and I'm glad that Sakib also brought it up, which is also the case with the US, that in Europe we have seen a lot of HVDC connections. Uh, when we talk about HVDC connections, it could be either it could be used to transport any sort of power from one place to another, just like AC transmission lines. Uh, but we have seen a lot of these interconnections between different countries in Europe when we talk about HVDC. But what is going to happen in future is that when we talk about offshore wind farms, we know that there have been plenty of them already in Europe, and there are going to be a lot of them coming online in near future as well. Due to added benefits of HVDC over HVAC, we are going to see that HVDC is going to play a very crucial, important role to enable these offshore wind generation sources to have their energy transferred from these centers to the load centers ultimately.
Thank you so much, Kota. That was very, very insightful. Now I'm just going to turn to Elise quickly for a transmission and distribution perspective on the power grid. Elise, what can you say about the amendment of the Renewable Energy Directive?
Thank you, Zainab. Under this directive, they have set a new 2030 target of 40%, which is up from the previous 32% to have energy use from renewables by 2030. And basically, this translates to roughly a commitment of adding 500 gigawatts of by EU by 2030. And I believe that this will act as a key enabler for the legacy grid to become greener moving forward. And since the end goal of the European Green Deal is to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050, so therefore it makes sense for the T&D equipment, which is actually being used to support this massive integration of renewables into the grid, to be utilizing environmentally friendly technologies so as to curb the SF6 emissions in the coming years.
So that means an increase in the adoption of SF6 alternatives in switchgear, correct?
Yes, exactly. So basically, the global warming potential of SF6 recently got revised in the new IPCC AR6 from the previous 23,500. Now it has become 25,200, becoming even more crucial that the end user shift towards using SF6 free switchgear. And if we talk about HV switchgear, there are three main SF6 free HV switchgear manufacturers in the world: Hitachi Energy, Siemens Energy, and GE. And all of them have very well-defined roadmaps according to which they'll continuously be launching new SF6 free switchgear products till 2030 to address this potential growth in demand. And then coming to the European Commission, it is also playing a very crucial role in facilitating this shift towards SF6 alternatives. Under its LIFE program, EU has so far funded two projects for GE Grid Solutions. Previously in 2019, GE received funding of approximately 2.2 million euros to facilitate the development of a 240 kV 63 kilo A circuit breaker, and then now recently it has again provided funding of approximately 2.5 million euros for the development of a 245 kV circuit breaker. So this goes to show EU's commitment towards decarbonization of Europe's grid, and then this will also act as a potential ripple effect across Europe in validating that fluoronitrile-based gas mixtures can be applied to all other high voltage levels of the European electrical network.
What about biodegradable transformer oils?
Yeah, just like the eco-friendly technologies being promoted in the switchgear industry, we can expect that there will be an increased tendency to use biodegradable transformer oils. In fact, this is already happening. We see that companies like Midel and Cargill, they are growing in business. In fact, earlier in January, the manufacturer ITPO Transformerates, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, they partnered with Cargill Bioindustrial to use the FR3 natural ester fluid in their new line for ecological transformers.
All right, Aliza, I'm going to stay with you here. Moving on to the second power grid impacting amendment, the amendment of the Energy Efficiency Directive. What does this mean for the grid?
Basically, this requires the grid equipment to increase in efficiency. So EU made its Tier 2 of its Eco Design Directive effective from 1st July 2021. The regulation applies to all transformers placed in the market or put into service in the UK as well as the EU, and lays out Tier 2 efficiency requirements for transformers with a minimum power rating of 1 kVA used in 50 Hz electricity network. The European Commission estimates that 2.9% of all electricity generated across the EU 27 and the UK is wasted through transformer losses. So this roughly amounts to 93 terawatt hours of energy being lost.
How much energy can we expect to save with the more energy efficient transformers?
This should basically lead to an energy savings of around 16 terawatt hour per year after 2020, which is equivalent to basically 3.7 million tons of less CO2 being emitted each year. And to add more to this, the tier 2 specifications for transformer losses, they aspire to reduce the energy waste by 10% compared to the tier 1 levels.
That sounds fantastic. So thank you so much, Elise, for that. I'm going to jump into the last grid impacting point here, the revision to the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, which ties into the Fuel EU Maritime Initiative. Kutub, how is this going to change the landscape of onshore power supply?
Right. When we talk about alternative fuels infrastructure directive of EU, uh, it, uh, so first of all, it primarily requires aircrafts and ships, which means aviation and maritime industry, to have access to clean energy supply in all major ports and airports. When we specifically talk about onshore power supply or shoreside electricity, there are two articles in this amendment which have been revised. So if I go back into the time and talk about when they were first when these articles first came into being or were initiated, they just talk about that member states are going to have policies in place to deploy or install shoreside electricity. There was and of course they have a specific definition for that what kind of ports are going to have this kind of technology deployed, which is primarily divided into their core ports and comprehensive ports. But this is what they wanted to do. Now in 2014 there was no criteria defined. There was no additional information provided on that what kind of vessels are going to be included. Let's say if there is a vessel which is not just which is docked at the port for just 1 hour, is it also going to require that shoreside electricity or not? So there were several things which needed clarification. Now, when we talk about amendment to this specific directive of alternative fuels infrastructure, they have come up with several criteria to actually define that what kind of ports are, let's say, what kind of vessels and ports are going to be there, which are going to be which are going to require shore power in future.
What are the targets set for shoreside electricity supply in maritime ports?
Right. As I said that before talking about these targets, I wanted to define that what is the, let's say, difference between their comprehensive and core ports. So when we talk about their core ports, the core ports are the ports which are, let's say, of major strategic interest, which contribute a lot to their cargo, passenger, or bulk traffic for any given European country. That's one. Secondly, they when we talk about comprehensive ports, they are the ones which are basically acting as secondary hubs for secondary C hubs for for these core ports. So they have defined different targets basically for these core ports and for these comprehensive ports. For seagoing containers, there are different targets. For ro-ro vessels, there are different targets. Mostly, the basic criteria which they have defined for all these containers or type of vessels is that they need to be they need to have a weightage or capacity of more than 5,000 gross tons. That's one in the Article 9. And second thing is that they have to have a specific number of port calls in a year in a specific amount of time, and after that they would be eligible for having shoreside electricity. That's what Article 9 entails. And when we talk about Article 10, that basically entails the targets for shoreside electricity for inland waterway transport or maritime ports. That article entails that there are going to be at least one installation at every core port by year 2025. I believe it's the beginning of year 2025. And for comprehensive ports, they need to achieve the similar target of having at least one shoreside system by I believe the beginning of year 2030. They have several emission reduction targets related to that as well. I believe that is basically, I think they're around in 2030 they wish to have achieved the reduction of around I think 6 to 7% in their maritime GHG emissions. I think by 2050 they want to reduce it down to 75%. So that is their target, and that is why I believe if they wish to do that, OPS is going to play a major role in that.
That's quite interesting. And from what you're telling me, what I'm taking away is that the Fuel EU Maritime Initiative is springing out of this directive, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So but basically, on the basis of all these criteria which are provided in this amendment of Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive, this new Fuel Maritime Initiative is more of a roadmap to actually achieve all these goals. Basically, Fuel EU Maritime Initiative suggests that all the passenger and container ships should be using onshore power supply, and that is not just limited to the onshore power supply or shoreside electricity, but any sort of zero emission technology for their energy needs. I think they also have a timeline in place, which is, I think, again, January 2030.
I hear you saying that onshore power is going to play an important role here. So, which countries do you think have promising policies with regards to this?
When we specifically talk about Europe, it's one of the key markets for onshore power supply, and within Europe there are some countries which are actually way too mature than rest of the countries. Especially, let's say, if I talk about Norway, which has one of the major installed base of onshore power supply, actually major installed base share has with Norway. So when we talk about Norway, the reason because they have the highest share is the reason is that they have a governmental body under Ministry of Transport, which is Innova SF, which is a funding agency for uh, uh, engaging. So the aim of this funding agency is to engage with the ports, provide them the fundings, not for just the feasibility studies, but also for the actual deployments. So Innova has been funding almost close to 100% of the funds for every project in recent years. But now I believe that I think since 2020 they have reduced the funding to 50%, because now the wave of this shore power has already got its traction in Norway. Talking about some other countries, I would like to talk about France, where they have actually developed a national policy framework, and they are specifically working on this directive of 2014, where they plan to have shore power uh, in around, I think, a major of their ports, and for that they have an allocated funding of close to 200 million euros. Talking about Italy, that's again Italian Ministry of Infrastructure and Sustainability has plans of, I think, installing shore power in major of their ports, and that means I think they have a specific number which is, I think, more than 30, probably close to 35, where they plan to install shore power. And again, when we talk about all these countries, they're all trying to follow the I should say the goals which have been mentioned in these Fit for 55 regulations. Of course, there are plans which were kept in place before Fit for 55 came into the being. But yes, primarily they are trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, which perfectly aligns with the things which are mentioned in Fit for 55. Similarly, lastly, talking about Spain, they also have a specific OPS master plan for Spanish ports, and I think they also have I think that program is also funded by a CEF program to implement shore power across all the 20 ports of across all the Spanish 20 ports. So if you notice that this is not just related to or confined to the countries, there are fundings available on regional level to support these kind of initiatives for these countries to have these shore power systems in place. For some, the targets is 2025, and for some, this target is 2030. But yes, this is it's been made sure that the market stays very supportive, not just in terms of the technology, but also in terms of the challenges like economic viability and electricity tariffs.
Thank you so much, Krita, for that very detailed and informative key country breakdown. I just want to stay on the same topic here. I'd like to jump back to Elise, again, talking about the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive. Elise, I want to get your 2 cents on what this means for EV ground, like the EV ground perspective on this. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Thank you, Zainab. So electric vehicle adoption is in full swing across the globe with an expected double-digit growth. And correspondingly, due to that, the investment in EV charging infrastructure is also increasing. And due to these carbon reduction targets and these two plans that we are also discussing, the Fit for 55 package and also the Biden's infrastructure plan, they are sort of they are in fact intensifying this growth in EV charging infrastructure and EVs. And this aggressive penetration of EV charging infrastructure will impact the grid since the energy demand will increase multiple folds. Generation and transmission capacity is not going to be a problem. However, a near-term bottleneck is expected in the distribution grid since the distribution grid was not designed to meet immediate increase in capacity demands. Yeah.
So managed charging is going to be pivotal here.
Yes, absolutely. Managed charging could very well be a savior for now, and is being mandated via policies in countries such as Germany and the UK. Managed charging, just to elaborate what it is, so managed charging uses software platforms to monitor and control charger operations. So sites remotely manage and monitor the health of their chargers. Then you have access to detailed diagnostics and operational data, and then finally, there is a possibility to exchange financial, driver, and other source of data.
I understand that managed charging is slowly becoming a part of policies in different countries as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like I just mentioned, UK and Germany. So, for example, if we first discuss the UK, the government in the UK is going to legislate for all newly built homes and workplaces to have smart EV chargers installed from 2022 onwards, and these smart chargers will not operate during peak hours to avoid putting pressure on the grid. And then, in the case of Germany, for more than 3 chargers in multifamily homes, it is generally necessary to have load management feature in the chargers. Um, and then overall, like just to conclude or to sum up, DSOs have a major role to play ensuring installation of these managed or network chargers. And majority of the EV chargers in public applications are already networked or already managed. So private charging will also need to be managed in the future. And if not, like without managed charging, required grid upgrades can be as high as USD 2,500 per EV in a utilities network. So all in all, load management will become a crucial requirement in the top EV markets as the chargers increase in the utility networks.
Thank you so much, Elise. So Sake, we started
Thank
today's
you.
session off with you. I'm going to come back to you. I want to know what else do you feel is important to add to the discussion here in terms of the growth of EV chargers?
First, I really liked the insights from both from Kutab and Elise. I liked the way you said, Kutab, that the wave of shore power. I hope there was a pun intended. The wave of shore power is expected to reach beyond European continent as well. So I think both of them have really nicely summarized that how the role of power grid is going to be extremely crucial in terms of integrating more renewables moving forward, and having electrification in the transport sector. And the crucial thing, I think, one of the key takeaways for me throughout this discussion was that every industry, even though there might not be, let's say, binding targets, but we can see some roadmaps showing up for different industries. Kutab talked about maritime industry, right? There was nothing before that the maritime industry needs to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. It was the focus was always on the road transport infrastructure. So now we see at least the roadmaps, right? And then in order to facilitate that, the role needs to be played by the grid, by the industry, which is sort of very, let's say, conservative, has been very conservative in its approach, but now things need to change very quickly in order to facilitate this change moving forward, both from the renewable perspective, from the electrification point of view as well, across the transport sector, be it the road transport or the maritime industry or even the aviation industry as well. So a lot of responsibility is on the operators of grid. That means the distribution system operators, the DSOs, utilities, and TSOs. I think Lisa also raised a very important point. The first, let's say, node of the network, if you will, this impact is going to hit is the distribution network. So we think that higher, let's say, responsibility is on the distribution system operators, that they need to prepare the network, because she rightly said that traditionally grids were not prepared for this, right? You would not see megawatts of loads popping up here and there previously in the grid, right? Grid was not supposed to accommodate that, but now with EV chargers we see that a big EV charging hub can go anywhere between 6 to 8 gigawatts. um, so in order to make sure that this process goes smoothly, grid needs to play its role. And I heard a very nice comparison of these two industries, especially the automotive, if we stay on the EV charger side, that the automotive industry and the power grid industry traditionally has been very conservative, not really, let's say, welcoming the change because of the nature of the industries. Right now it's a marriage of these two industries, right? So it's very important for both of these industries to move quickly in order to facilitate this change moving forward.
I would just like to add one thing and agree with Saqib that the role of TSO is going to be extremely important, and I think many of them have already started to work and plan on the lines that yes, there are going to be additional requirements in terms of the distribution infrastructure. I was actually looking into a news for again Norway, where at one of the airport in Bergen, lot of cruise vessels are being docked. Now, for that, they have several systems in place, and that was actually a bottleneck for or a challenge for the local grid, which is BKK grid operator, which is BKK Net, to actually supply energy to that port. So what they did was that they had to upgrade their transformer substation from I believe 45 kilovolts to somewhere close to 132 kilovolt operating level. Now that's not just it. As Alize also mentioned that there is chase for green across all the T&D sector. The switchgear which were deployed were SF6 free. For that specific project. Now, this is just one example, but there are several such examples which we have seen recently and are continue to see in future as well. That DSOs and these ports and these charging e-mobility charging infrastructure stakeholders, they're all working. Somewhere in direct partnership or somewhere at some places in indirect partnership with each other to make sure that the network overall remains or stays sustainable.
Thank you so much, Kutab. Thank you, Saqib. On the whole today, from the discussion that we've had, there's no doubt that as these deals incentivize green energy, the role of the power grid is ever so important from an accommodation standpoint to adopt these new practices, an efficiency standpoint to make the new incentives viable, and from a sustainability standpoint to carry these initiatives into permanent practice. So understanding the impact and interaction of these climate policies with the power grid is paramount to understanding and evaluating these climate policies on the whole, which is something I think we've done very well in today's session. And that was very informative hearing from the three of you. So Saqib, Alize, Kutab, thank you for joining us today. The thoughts coming from you about the points to note in the climate action plans of the United States and Europe, and about how those points tie into expectations and explanations of what already is and will go on with the power grid were greatly insightful. So thank you guys for being here today. Loved having you.
Thank you for
Pleasure
having
to be a part
us,
of
Thank
this.
Zainab.
you for having us.
Fantastic. So this concludes our deep dive into climate action deals and their impact on the power grid. Thank you for tuning in to get the PTR perspective. We'll see you next time.